She walked into a gun shop wearing a gray hoodie, and silence followed her like a shadow. Mocked at first, no one knew the quiet woman once held off an entire armored column alone, as the last survivor of a ghost unit the government erased. But when her tattoo caught the light, everything changed. Welcome to my channel. You ever walk into a place and feel the air change the moment you step through the door? That's what happened the day I walked into Sanders & Sons Gunsmith in Sheridan, Wyoming. Cold wind at my back, gray hoodie pulled low, hands tucked into the pockets of my jeans. I wasn't looking to impress anyone. Just wanted to see if the Colt M1911 on their website was as authentic as they claimed. Place was packed. 3 ranch hands arguing over scopes, some weekend warrior showing off his tricked-out AR, and a couple of teenagers whispering near the ammo racks. The guy behind the counter, young, cocky, tin vest full of morale patches, sized me up like I'd walked into the wrong building. Looking for something in pink, sweetheart? He said with a smirk. Maybe a Hello Kitty keychain? I didn't answer. Just kept walking toward the vintage handgun case, glass smudged from a day of curious fingers. There was a pause, then a snicker from one of the kids. She even know what a gun is? Probably here for a selfie. I reached toward the case, pushing up my sleeve to get a better look at the old Colt inside. That's when the room shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic. No gasps or shouts. Just silence, the kind that carries weight. The kind that follows recognition. Because on the inside of my wrist, barely visible in the dim shop lighting, was a tattoo. Simple. Black ink. Just a string of letters and numbers. BR 219 Kia. A tattoo that didn't show up in glossy recruiting brochures or war memorials. But for those who knew, it was louder than a trumpet. The man behind the counter, Cal Sanders, former Navy, according to the patch on his sleeve, went still. He set down the Glock he'd been cleaning. Ma'am, he said slowly, like his mouth was trying to catch up with his brain. You were with Blackridge 219? I gave a single nod. That's all it took. The 2 teens near the ammo froze. One of them actually dropped the box of 5.56 rounds he was holding. Blackridge 219 wasn't something you found on Wikipedia or in the Pentagon archives. Because officially, we never existed. We were the ghost company, used for operations the government never wanted to explain. 6 missions, 137 confirmed kills, and 1 survivor. Me. The silence in Sanders & Sons thickened until you could hear the sound of oil dripping from a cleaning cloth onto the mat behind the counter. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed wrong. And me? I just kept looking at the Colt like it was a photograph of an old friend I hadn't seen since the world went dark. The old 1911 had mismatched parts. Frame was World War I era, but the safety? That was definitely from an A1 model, maybe post-Korea. I traced the scratch marks near the barrel lug. Someone had field stripped it more times than a standard-issue rifle ever needed. This wasn't a collector's piece. This was a sidearm that had done things. Been through things. Ma'am, Cal said again, voice softer now. I was Navy, just logistics. But I heard about 219. Whole unit got written off outside of Marja. Last I heard, there were no survivors. There weren't, I said. First words I'd spoken since stepping into that store. A middle-aged man in a multicam vest, standing 3 feet from me, turned slowly. Wait, he said. You're telling me, Blackridge 219? That unit was wiped. Everyone said it was a drone error. Some kind of satellite blackout. I didn't answer. The truth was, we weren't wiped out by accident. We were the accident. Sacrificed to delay a regional collapse that would have drawn in too many cameras, too many questions. I was the sniper on Overwatch. They called me Ghost Light back then, because when the last signal flare went up and the line was about to break, I stayed behind. Held the ridge. One woman with a bolt action and a half-spent mag, delaying an entire armored column long enough for an evac chopper to lift out the wounded. Nobody ever told me thanks. They erased my name, handed me a disability discharge, and told me to move on. So I did. Into the mountains of Wyoming, where the trees didn't ask questions and the cold didn't care who I used to be. But I never got rid of that tattoo. Where'd you serve? I asked Cal, finally looking up. USS Macon Island, he said. 2009 to 2014. You resupplied us, I said flatly. Your crate had a broken oxygen sensor. We fixed it with a water bottle and duct tape. His eyes widened like he'd seen a ghost. That was your team? I nodded. You called it in as a faulty manifest. We logged it under creative engineering. He gave a half laugh, like his brain was having a hard time balancing the woman standing in front of him with the legacy behind that tattoo. The teen with the dropped ammo finally found his voice. I didn't mean any disrespect, he said quickly. I just thought you were a tourist. I finished for him. Lost. Looking for pink camo? He blushed and stared at the floor. That's what happens, I continued, when you judge by what you see. You miss the quiet ones. Cal slowly moved around the counter. That pistol, you want to see it closer? I nodded once. He unlocked the case and placed the Colt in my hands. It was heavier than it looked, cold from the glass, but it warmed quickly in my grip. My fingers found the grip like they'd never left it. Thumb resting on the safety. Trigger guard pressing against the callus still on my knuckle from a decade ago. You know how to strip that? Cal asked. I looked at him without blinking. I could take it apart blindfolded and reassemble it while under mortar fire. Another silence. But this time, it was reverent. The Colt in my hands wasn't just steel and springs. It was memory, pressure, breath. Every shooter knows their trigger point, but when you've fired one-handed in crosswinds with teammates bleeding out behind you, you don't just know your weapon, you become it. I turned it over in my hands, letting the light catch the wear near the ejection port. Whoever carried this had depended on it more than once. The slide was polished not from care, but from use. The front sight had a tiny nick, just enough to shift aim by a hair unless you compensated. Cal watched me with a look halfway between suspicion and awe. That one came in a trade from an estate out in Buffalo, he said. Guy said it belonged to his granddad, but the parts don't match. Hybrid piece. Field modified. Not just field modified, I said. Field corrected. See this? I pointed to the barrel bushing. This was swapped out with a match-grade unit. Probably when the original warped from heat. Someone knew what they were doing. I caught a glimpse of myself in the counter glass. Same gray hoodie. Same low ponytail. Same woman who people mistook for a wanderer or worse, a lost cause. But behind that reflection was someone else. Someone built in the quiet between explosions. Someone who'd gone invisible not because she had to, but because it was the only way to survive. You thinking of buying it? Cal asked. I looked up. Maybe. Or maybe I just wanted to see if it still fit. You mean your hand? I shook my head. No. My story. Behind us, one of the ranch hands muttered. Well, hell, I came in to buy ammo, not listen to a history lecture. Cal shot him a look. You might want to listen. You're standing in front of a piece of history. And I don't mean the Colt. The man raised his hands in mock surrender and backed off. That was the moment I felt the shift. It wasn't in the room, it was in me. I'd spent so long trying not to be seen, it had never occurred to me what it would feel like to be understood. A younger guy, beard still patchy, stepped forward from near the holster rack. He was holding a polymer-framed Glock, fingers resting clumsily outside the trigger guard. Ma'am, he said, stumbling on the word like it was too big for his mouth. Is it true what they said about 219? That you were the only one who made it out? I didn't speak for a moment. Then I lifted the edge of my sleeve again and showed him the rest of the tattoo. Beneath, BR, 219 Kia, were 6 initials, one for each teammate I buried with my silence. I never said their names out loud. Not because I forgot, but because I wasn't sure the world deserved them. I made it out, I said finally. But that doesn't mean I left. He nodded slowly, then glanced at the Glock in his hand. Could you? Would you teach me how to shoot like that? Like you did? I smiled barely. Lesson 1. You don't shoot like me. You learn why you're shooting first. Otherwise, the weapon owns you. Cal let out a low chuckle. Y'all better start taking notes. Word spreads fast in small towns, faster still in gun shops where respect is traded with the same weight as brass casings. By the time I'd set the Colt back on the velvet lining of the glass case, the whole store had fallen into a hush that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't comfort either. It was reverence, the kind that only shows up when someone finally connects myth to flesh. I hadn't come in to be recognized. Hell, I'd spent years doing everything I could to avoid it. But now I was standing at the center of a quiet circle. Cal stepped forward, clearing his throat like he was about to recite a prayer. You said your name was Claire? I nodded once. He looked at the tattoo again. Claire Halverson. That's the name on the old after-action reports. I remember now. You're the one who covered Delta route for 6 hours alone in Marja. They said your team was overrun, and you held the ridge with a bolt gun and 6 rounds. 7, I corrected. I kept the last one. Someone behind me whispered, "What for?" I met his eyes. In case I ran out of targets. You could hear the exhale ripple through the room. The middle-aged guy in the tactical vest, the one who earlier said my Colt was just for show, stepped forward now with a different look on his face. Not pride, not pity, something deeper. "I served 12 years in the Army," he said. "But I never saw combat. We trained, did patrols. Stateside stuff. I read about Black Ridge 219. We used your mission in drills. But they said it was fictional, a scenario based on composite data." "That's what they wanted you to believe," I said. "A convenient story made of real blood." He reached out his hand, tentative like he thought I might vanish. "I want to say thank you." I looked at his hand for a moment, then took it. His grip was firm, but there was a tremble in it. I didn't mention it. That handshake opened the floodgate. The older guy from the reloading counter, Vietnam vet judging by the eagle tattoo on his forearm, gave a slow nod. "You don't have to speak," he said. "I know what it costs to carry the ones who didn't come back." One of the younger customers spoke next, the same kid who'd mocked me about pink Glocks. "Ma'am," he said, "I was out of line earlier. I didn't know. If I'd known, I never would've." "You shouldn't have to know," I interrupted. "Respect isn't earned by seeing a kill count. It's earned by listening before you speak." He lowered his head and said nothing. That was better than any apology. Then Cal disappeared into the back room and returned with a wrapped object. He set it gently on the counter and pulled back the cloth to reveal something I hadn't seen in over a decade. A field map from the Kandahar corridor. Faded, dog-eared, marked with call signs and overwatch positions. In the corner, scrawled in pencil, BR 219. "I kept this," Cal said quietly. "Picked it up at a base decommission sale. Didn't mean much at the time. Just thought it was interesting. But now," he looked me dead in the eye, "now I know who held that corner." I didn't speak. I just placed my hand over the map, over the initials of my squad, and let the silence do what words couldn't. They always talk about how silence speaks volumes. But they never mention what it says, what it costs to hold it, carry it, drag it across a decade like a rucksack full of names you'll never speak outside your own head. I left the shop that afternoon with more than I came for. I didn't buy the Colt. Not yet. Cal insisted it would stay behind the counter, waiting, untouched. "This one's off the floor," he told the others. "Reserved for when she's ready." Truth is, I wasn't sure I ever would be. Buying that pistol would have felt too much like closing a chapter one wasn't ready to stop reading. Like letting go of ghosts I still spoke to on quiet nights. I didn't go straight home. I drove up into the Bighorn foothills, gravel pinging off my undercarriage as I pulled the truck off-road. Found a high bluff with a view of the valley where the wind had room to move. That's where I sat, watching the light slip sideways across the hills, remembering. Back when I was still part of 219, we had a saying, "Every round tells a story. Make it a good one." I'd taken 19 shots during that final stand. 18 kills. 1 miss, on purpose. Warning shot. Gave a scared kid with an old AK enough reason to turn and run before he crossed into our kill zone. I remember watching him disappear into the hills, boots slipping on loose shale, body barely more than a shadow in the dust. I think about him sometimes. Maybe he's still alive. Maybe he told his grandkids about the one time he got away from a ghost. The wind whipped across the bluff and rattled the empty casing I'd kept in my coat pocket all these years. My final round. The one I didn't fire. I thumbed it like a worry stone, copper jacket dulled from sweat and time. Below me, Sheridan spread out like a forgotten map, quiet, slow, mostly unbothered. And yet somehow changed. Because news travels fast. Especially when it's the kind nobody wants to believe at first. By the next morning, the story had moved from whispers at Sanders & Sons to a local veterans forum. Then someone posted a grainy photo of me at the counter, sleeve pulled back, wrist exposed. The caption just read, "She was there. She made it out. And she's still watching." I didn't find out until 2 days later when I pulled into town to grab groceries and noticed something odd. People looked at me differently. Not with awe. Not fear. With respect. That kind that doesn't need to be spoken. That lives in a nod. A door held open. A cashier saying, "Ma'am," a little softer than they used to. At the back of the local hardware store, a teenage boy, maybe the same one from the gun shop, was standing in front of a wall display of hunting rifles. He caught sight of me and straightened up. Didn't smile. Just gave a short, sharp nod. Eyes steady. Like he was trying to say, I get it now, without fumbling the words. And in a strange way, I believed him. The third time I visited Sanders & Sons, I didn't go for the Colt. I went because Cal had asked if I'd be willing to talk to a few young shooters. Locals, mostly. Kids who'd picked up a rifle before they ever learned what a sight picture was. Most of them didn't know the difference between a double tap and a double feed. But they were eager. And for once, I didn't say no. We met in the back room, near the loading bench and parts lockers. It smelled of hops number 9 and worn leather. There were 5 of them, all between 18 and mid-20s. They stood when I walked in. That alone told me they were serious. I didn't start with stories. Didn't mention combat or sniping or Blackridge. I started with posture, grip, breathing. Shooting, I told them, isn't about pulling a trigger. It's about control. Control over your body. Control over fear. And above all, control over intent. They listened, heads nodding, questions loaded in their eyes but held until the right time. One kid, barely out of high school by the look of him, had brought a sleek AR-15 with a holographic sight and laser pointer. He cradled it like it was a newborn. I asked him to put it down and handed him a .22 bolt action instead. Start here, I said. He looked confused. But this has no frills, I interrupted. Which means every mistake will be yours, not the guns. Over the next few days, that bolt-action rifle told him everything he didn't want to hear, about his breathing, his rush, his impatience. But he kept coming back. So did the others. We set up targets behind Cal's shop, homemade ones at first. Later, someone donated steel plates. Word spread. More veterans showed up, not to instruct, but to observe, to nod, to remember. One of them, a soft-spoken former Marine named Reuben, approached me after a Saturday session. His sleeves were rolled up, showing a tattoo in the same spot as mine. Different unit. Same ink style. I thought about teaching, he said, but I didn't think I had anything to offer. After watching you today, I think maybe I do. I handed him the .22. Then start with the basics. That's where all of us begin again. By the end of the month, what started as a casual request turned into something more. We didn't call it a class, didn't advertise, but every Tuesday and Saturday, young men and women came quietly, carrying whatever gear they had. Some were ex-military, most weren't. Didn't matter. We were building something that didn't need a name. A place where the old ways still mattered. Where silence wasn't emptiness. It was respect. There's a sound I'll never forget. It's not gunfire. Not really. It's what comes right after, when the brass hits the ground and the world waits to see what you do next. That little ring, soft but sharp, like a question being asked in metal. That sound had followed me through too many valleys, down too many hallways. And now, on the back lot behind Sanders & Sons, it rang again, over and over, as new shooters learned to breathe, aim, and listen. I stood behind Ellie, a 22-year-old forestry student who had never fired anything more powerful than a nail gun before she signed up. She was shaking the first time she shouldered a rifle. You don't have to shoot today, I told her. You're already here. That's enough for now. But she did. Took her time. Exhaled. Missed completely. Then she chambered another round. She hit the paper target on her third try. Next to her, Marcus, the kid who once mocked me in the shop, had become a quiet leader among the group. He no longer brought his Glock with the oversized magazine and slide cuts. He showed up every week with a plain Springfield 1911. No rails. No red. Just iron and instinct. They called it obsolete, he'd told me once. But I figured, if you trusted one, maybe I should too. He hit the steel plate at 15 yards that morning. Dead center. No smile. Just a breath out and a nod. After training wrapped, a few of the younger ones lingered, as they often did. Not to ask for advice. Just to be. Sometimes I'd find them sitting on the tailgate of Cal's truck, sipping coffee, cleaning their gear in companionable silence. One afternoon, I found Reuben standing near the sand berm, eyes locked on something far off. You okay? I asked. Yeah, he said. Just remembering. I didn't press. Veterans don't always talk in complete sentences. Sometimes a look, a hand on a rifle stock, or the pause before pulling a trigger says more than any story could. I glanced at the sky. Clear blue. Air cold enough to bite, just how I liked it. This, Reuben said, gesturing around him. This is what I thought coming home would feel like. Not the parades, not the flags, just people trying to do things right. You're not alone, I said. He nodded, then added, neither are you. That hit harder than he knew. Because I'd spent so many years convincing myself that solitude was strength, that distance was the price I had to pay to survive what others couldn't. But maybe that wasn't true anymore. Maybe the best parts of what we carried were meant to be shared, not buried. That evening, after everyone had gone, Cal and I locked up the shop. I stayed behind a few minutes, walking through the aisle one last time. When I got to the counter, the Colt was still there, still tucked neatly beneath the glass. Still waiting. I looked at it for a long time. Then I reached into my wallet and slid a single, folded dollar bill across the counter with a note written on the back. Hold until earned. Winter came early that year. The first snow dusted the lot behind Sanders and Sons in mid-October, turning the range into a quiet field of breath clouds and muffled footsteps. Training didn't stop. If anything, more people showed up. Something had shifted. We weren't just practicing anymore. We were remembering. Ellie, now steady and composed, hit her target from 50 yards and whispered to herself, for those who didn't get to come back. No one asked who she meant. We all had our own names. One afternoon, a local sheriff's deputy showed up. He wasn't there to train. He just watched, arms folded. When I approached, he asked, "Could you work with one of my guys? Struggles at distance. Good kid, but tense." I nodded. "Send him Saturday. But tell him he won't touch a rifle until he can slow his breathing." Cal chuckled when he overheard. "You turning this place into a monastery?" "Something like that," I said. "A monastery with muzzle brakes." That Saturday, the deputy's guy, Cooper, showed up. Tall, polite, stiff as a fence post. Wouldn't meet my eye at first. Nervous. I handed him a cold barrel and said, "Your target is paper, but your threat is doubt. Deal with both." He looked confused. Most people do the first time. By the end of the hour, he was grouping at 75 yards. Breathing better. Holding steadier. "Keep practicing," I told him. "But not for me. For the people who depend on your aim." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." That was enough. We never needed ranks out here. Just responsibility. Thanksgiving came and went without ceremony. No parade. No visitors. Just a tray of food left at my cabin by Ellie. A hand-scrawled note tucked underneath. "For what you've given us." I hadn't celebrated holidays in years. Not since the uniform. Not since the 6 names etched along my arm had become the only ones I could bear to remember. But something had changed. The community had grown. Quietly, naturally. Veterans, ranchers, deputies, single moms with questions about home defense. We weren't a class. We weren't a militia. We were something else. Something simpler. We were a passing of the torch. One week, a woman named Marisol joined. Mid-30s, nurse, 2 kids. She'd been robbed at gunpoint months before. Never held a firearm in her life. "I don't want to be afraid," she told me. So I showed her the 22. Weeks passed. Her grip strengthened. Her breathing slowed. Her confidence rose. One night, she stayed late to clean the practice rifles. Her hands were precise. Focused. I watched her in silence. "You'd have made a good 219, I said softly. She paused. "What's that?" "Nothing," I said. "Just an old ghost." But ghosts, it turned out, weren't always meant to haunt. Some returned to guide. Cal noticed the shift too. "You know," he said one evening while locking up, "this place feels different now. Like it matters more." "It always mattered," I replied. "You just didn't see the weight until someone carried it." He didn't ask what I meant. Didn't have to. The next day, I found something on the counter, beside the Colt I still hadn't bought, a wooden plaque. Hand-carved. Old oak. It read, "In memory of Blackridge 219, seen or not, they covered us." No signatures. No ceremony. Just truth. I finally bought the Colt. Didn't tell anyone. Just walked in one snowy morning, laid the folded bill Cal had been holding for weeks on the counter, and nodded. He slid it across to me like it was sacred, wrapped in oilcloth, weighty with memory. It wasn't a weapon anymore. Not really. It was a bridge. A final link between who I'd been and who I'd become. I didn't hang it up or lock it away. I used it, cleaned it, taught others with it. Let them feel its weight, its balance, the way the trigger reminded you that hesitation was its own kind of danger. Marcus, now a confident instructor himself, stood beside me one afternoon as Ellie hit her mark cleanly from 100 yards. "She's better than I was at that age," he said. "She's better than I was," I replied. And that's the point. They didn't need my scars to become skilled. They needed my patience, my stories, my stillness. In the weeks that followed, more people came. Some wanted to learn. Others just needed to see what it looked like to survive with dignity, even when history tried to erase you. I never gave lectures. I just gave space. Space for others to grow. Space for silence to speak. Cal added a new section to the shop, nothing big. A wooden display near the register. Inside, 6 brass shells, each engraved with a set of initials. Below them, a simple plaque. "We don't forget. We train. We pass it on." Every Tuesday and Saturday, I showed up early, checked every weapon, straightened every paper target, cleaned the benches, sat for a minute in silence before the others arrived. Sometimes, I whispered their names. My 6. Not to mourn, to remind them they were still teaching. And on the coldest mornings, when breath turned to fog and the steel rang with perfect shots, I could almost hear them laughing again. In that far-off ridge in Marja, with the sun rising behind enemy lines. People still come into Sanders and Sons expecting a store. They leave with something else. A lesson, a truth, a story told not with words, but with steel, stance, and silence. I never needed medals. I just needed to know someone was listening. And now, when I watch a young hand steady itself on a trigger, breath slow, eyes focus, I know they are. Because every shot still tells a story. And this time, it's ours.